Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and I'm very excited about today's topic because we are going to be talking about grammar wars. And so I'm joined today by Nicole Pytel. Hey, Nicole.
Hi, Morgan. Hi, everybody. I have been preparing for this war since the 7th grade. I am ready.
And Chris Ulbrich.
Hey, Morgan. Let's get ready to rumble.
Literally, Chris, as we suggested this topic, was like, I think I could just do this on my own. So I think Chris has got quite a lot to say. So I want to open hostilities around grammar wars about the Oxford comma, which is the comma that you insert in a list at the end. I'm buying apples, oranges, and bananas. I'm putting it in there. I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma, just laying my cards on the table here, but it is banned under AP style, and that means that for many publications and for many brands, therefore, it cannot be used. So, Chris, why don't you tell us some of your feelings about the Oxford comma?
So I started my career in journalism editing online product reviews. And I worked with a senior copy editor who was more dedicated to the Oxford comma than anyone I've met since then, which is really saying something because people who like the Oxford comma, they really want to tell you about it. It's part of their personality. It's the sort of thing they're going to put in their bio. So I didn't really have a dog in the hunt at the time. I was a budding journalist and figured the AP style book was supposed to be my Bible. But I found myself in a newsroom where the Oxford style guide was the rule. And I like to say that the adherence to the Oxford comma was even more dedicated there than what I could see in the New Yorker. So for some reason, this product review site was pickier about it than picky. However, over the years, I have become less. I mean, for one thing, in PR, you're used to using the AP style book. But at this point, I would say 85% of our clients are Oxford internally with their own marketing materials. I've tried to hold the line for AP style, but the dam is even starting to break with publications. I believe it was TechCrunch that recently adopted the Oxford comma. It was a moment kind of like when Wired decided to lowercase internet, or actually I uppercase it. Anyway, I actually find myself agnostic about it now. I mean, as someone who has strong opinions about punctuation, I feel like Oxford has won and we're just cleaning up. I still feel some connection to the AP book, but clearly the people have spoken and we're living in an Oxford comma world now. We're just doing the mopping up operations at this point.
You will have to pry the Oxford comma out of my cold, dead hands for real. Not using it can be confusing in certain contexts. And we have a couple of clients that it is in their style guide. They will not use it. And obviously I adhere to that. But I feel it every time I don't put it in there. It just feels a little wrong. And especially writing about tech, I feel like there are circumstances where it makes the sentence a little bit confusing. And sometimes there's just no way around that. But yeah, I agree. I think it's the Oxford commas world and we're all living in it. And it looks better. It makes more sense. It's just more organized. I don't know. It just works better.
AP has got this wrong. And if they only had got it right, then we would have saved ourselves hours of removing the sprinkled, well-intentioned Oxford commas that people put into press releases. And shout out to all the PR people who have carefully removed them so they can adhere to AP style. But if the AP style only caved into the Oxford comma tidal wave, life would be simpler.
Right. And honestly, it's becoming such a hassle to remember which clients, because it used to be everyone was AP. Everyone was fine using AP, no matter what they did on their own websites. But more and more, and for understandable reasons, they're just insisting, no, we're going to be Oxford in our press releases. We're going to be Oxford on our website. And then you have to keep track of which clients are Oxford clients and which are AP. And of course, inevitably, if you're using AP in something, you find that right before you publish a press release, someone has popped into the draft and changed all the commas. And then you have to decide, am I going to take it back? And then you have inconsistencies in the doc. And we just really just need to standardize. And the truth is, anecdotally, I don't know if this is true. What I always heard about the AP comma was that it was taken out in the era of the telegraph to reduce the number of characters that needed to be transmitted in stories. That might be one of those stories too good to be true, but it does seem clear that extra comma helps with readability, helps with clarity. Yeah, it seems inevitable.
Right. We're declaring victory for the Oxford comma, and hopefully the AP style guide can realize that we're past the age of the telegram and can solve everybody's woes on that. All right. The next one is the M dash. So the M dash is used for sort of breaks in thought. It's that long, almost triple length line. Now, this is not controversial, but it has become controversial because of ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is a lover of the M dash. So it has just pumped M dashes across all content. And now the poor M dash is a sign that you've basically just used AI to produce your content, and the world is a sadder place for it.
It is a sadder place indeed. And I'm going to tell you what, I've been using the M dash for so long. I actually started using it when I was a journalist, and it would really help in the teleprompter to kind of signal and do what it does. It's a break in the sentence, but I would use it constantly. You know, it just really, really helped with the flow of reading a teleprompter. And I just fell in love with it. And I still use it all the time. So ChatGPT, you're not taking this one away from me. I guarantee you, my clients will say in what I write, you will find at least one M dash in whatever I'm going to give you. And I swear ChatGPT did not write it, but it just makes sense. And I think going back to readability, it helps because it's there to create a break. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can inject more creativity into your writing, but you can't have this long, giant run-on sentence that goes on. And M dash helps you to kind of break up your thought or to add some emphasis, which is so important, you know, in landing pages or really short marketing copy, emails, things like that. I think it provides such a service in terms of readability that, like, sorry, ChatGPT, this one was mine first.
I would say that even before ChatGPT, I was really conscious of the rise of the M dash. And I remember thinking somewhere around the beginning of the blog era, so we're going back like over 20 years now, I remember feeling like M dashes were popping up even more. The M dash is the definitive punctuation mark for our era, not just the way we write, but also the way we think. It's interesting to speculate how much punctuation reflects our thinking habits and how much it influences our habits. But I feel like over the last 20 years, people's speech has become a lot more fragmented. It has become a lot more nested. So people will break. Here, I just did it right here. I do this myself all the time. I will get halfway into a sentence and I will cut off with what's effectively an M dash and make like a long parenthetical comment and then return to my original thought notionally within the same sentence. If you listen to people, that nesting can go 2 or 3 levels deep. And I don't think people used to talk that way. I think it's partly about the fragmentation of attention we're experiencing. But to Nicole's point, the other use of the M dash for punching ideas, I think that's really important. I think that's a combination of the influence of web copy, of needing to have a really clear, powerful takeaway from every line of text that you put on a homepage. But I think it also reflects a certain lack of confidence culturally in our ability to write long sentences and be understood. I mean, maybe I'm just speaking for myself because I feel that way, but a lot of the time at the end of a sentence, people have started using the M dash the way for hundreds of years we would have used a colon. But for some reason, the colon doesn't feel powerful enough to punch that last sentiment. And I wonder to what extent that's because it's a relatively shy and retiring mark visually on a screen. When you see that long dash, it really communicates, okay, there's something big. There's a big conclusion coming here in a way that those vertically oriented dots really don't.
Yeah, and I think the way that people consume content on the web, they don't sit down and read every single word. They scan things, and scannability has become huge in digital marketing, and it just breaks up paragraphs. You know, you don't have these giant walls of text looking back at you. And I agree, Chris, I think it's a lot more dramatic, for lack of a better word, than a colon, but it's also easier if you're scanning a page to get to the big point. Oh, wait, there's a little break there. That must be really important. Let me read that point. So I think the way that we converse has probably affected it, like Chris mentioned. And I think the way that we consume content in a digital world has also affected it.
So I'm thinking two thoughts. One, next up for our swag store is a t-shirt that said, I used the M dash before ChatGPT. So you can be proud about your M dash. And in researching this, I also came across the N dash, the little known N dash.
Right.
Poor cousin to the much more glamorous and lengthy M dash. And the N dash is the little sort of double hyphen, if you like, that you might put between a date range, 1990 to 2000. That little line in there, that I didn't know about this one, but that is the N dash.
Outside of typesetting, I don't think you ever see the N dash. I think you would need, I don't even know if there's a key. If it appears on most keyboards, you would have to enter some kind of hash code to summon it out of Word or whatnot. And I don't even know what that code is. I think most people go about their lives blissfully unaware of the existence.
Thought it was a hyphen, but no. The N dash is bigger than a hyphen. The N dash looks down upon the tiny little hyphen with its conjunctions. So I think we're saying, look, it's been overused. I expect ChatGPT or all these other AI generators will sort of learn not to use them. It's a bit of a tell as much, and the M dash will be restored to its rightful place. But if you are worried about it, I quite like a colon. I agree with you visually, but comes you, boom, full stop there, put a period, and into your point. So think about that one if you're a bit worried about it. The next one is the passive voice. Now, I am always getting my copy corrected for the overuse of the passive voice. And if you use Grammarly or any of those other little measuring things, it's always barking on about me and getting me to change my sentences to active. What do you think about this one, Nicole?
This literally gives me flashbacks to being 12 years old when my 7th grade English teacher drilled this into our heads. I still remember, what sounds better, Mr. Turner rang the bell or the bell was rung by a Mr. Turner? It will never get out of my head. And it's wordy, it's awkward, I can't think of a situation where it makes sense. It's just extra words, which when you're writing for the web, you don't want to have it longer. You want to be as concise as possible. So I think active voice, aside from being more active, is just a more concise way to share your points. And Morgan, the next time I read one of your blog posts, I'm just going to change all the passives to actives.
This is one of the great struggles of my career in writing. I, like Nicole, coming up through, and I do think this is probably an artifact of the American educational system. Note the M dashes around that last comment. I, like Nicole, had the passive voice beaten out of me. But if I look at my writing and I feel like there's something a bit off, or there's something a bit exhausting about it, I have come to think that it's about an imbalance in the use of active versus passive. And I think that an overuse of active tense, while not as bad as an overuse of the passive, or I'm sorry, not tense, voice, is noticeable. That the passive voice does have its place, but you wouldn't know that growing up in the American system. Like, the American system will relentlessly stamp out any use of the passive voice. Your English teacher will mark it wrong, 100% for sure. However, I think that in extended text, extended copy, passive voice can provide a much needed rest for the eye, for the reader's mind, especially if you have a lot of short sentences. Active voice over and over again can just feel like you have voices yelling at you from every direction. It's like a dog barking. Every sentence is vigorously clamoring for attention, and your mind as a reader, you have to take on the activity in every single sentence. And there's never any rest. There's never any calm in your writing. And I actually have been trying to train myself to let Morgan McLintic style a little bit of the passive voice back in, because I do think it adds some grace to your writing if used in judicious proportion.
This is interesting because obviously I grew up in the UK. You're taught about the passive and active voice. It just wasn't a big thing. It wasn't really in the English, on the English curriculum. I don't have, Mr. Turner rang the bell, or the bell was rung by Mr. Turner. It was rung by Mr. Turner instead of a different teacher, right? And it was totally fine. And so if you were trying to emphasize Mr. Turner ringing the bell, great. It wasn't a factor. I tend to, and this might be just my sloppy writing, but just use what feels comfortable to me and as I might say it. And I think increasingly as copy becomes more conversational, then it perhaps is sneaking in a little bit more. So my advice is sort of try the passive voice. You might like it. And as you say, Chris, I do think it can change the pace a little bit of a passage of writing and sort of just emphasize something a little bit different. But over here, definitely, it's a big thing. All right. So it's not inherently wrong to use it, but I think in generally it's frowned upon, it seems. Here's another one. Ending a sentence with a proposition. So, Nicole.
Morgan, please. A preposition.
Oh, I've said it wrong. What I actually mean is a preposition. So I was trying to think about how I could end the sentence. Nicole, where are you at with that? I was too busy thinking about that to actually say the word correctly.
Very slick, very slick. I think there is some wiggle room on this one because I think we've gotten more conversational just in the way that we communicate on the web. I think we're just a little bit different. We're a little bit more informal. And this is one that, yes, this was drilled into my head not to do, but I will do it.
Chris, where are you at on this?
I have come to a point in my life where I just don't care. What you will often hear from people criticizing this rule is that it was conceived by grammarians who were imitating the practices of Latin, ancient Greek, where those rules were much more tightly enforced and you didn't have as much freedom to play around. And people will point out that preposition literally means it's preposition. So it comes before the thing. It comes right before its object. Yeah, fine. I think the most important consideration in much of what we've been talking about, but prepositions are a great example, is clarity and power. If by moving a preposition to the end of a sentence, you are making the sentence more conspicuously stilted, that's not a win. If moving the preposition doesn't interfere with the sense of the sentence, if everyone understands what's being said, no one's going to give you an award for making the sentence more convoluted while being more technically accurate. I think as Nicole was saying earlier, as writing in general, journalism, PR writing, it's all become more conversational. Blogs helped that along a couple decades ago. We're not moving toward greater formality. We're moving toward less. And fewer people even recognize the rule. And I think rules are important insofar as they enforce practices that are objectively clearer and better for the reader, but this just isn't one. It's an arbitrary rule. And I think it's very rare that having a preposition at the end of a sentence is going to create any confusion at all. So I say move it.
Right. So, for example, this is something I care about. It's perfectly acceptable,
right,
compared to this is something about which I care. Sounds overly pedantic, and you would never write that. And I feel the same a bit about sort of split infinitives.
Oh, yeah.
People who contort a sentence to avoid splitting an infinitive, and it just ends up sounding like something from the 1800s. Let's just not go there.
And that's another example, by the way, of consciously copying ancient languages, because in those ancient languages, the infinitive is one word, so it can't be split. And so grammarians felt that an infinitive needed to be an indivisible unit.
In my notes here, Chris, I also, as we were talking about this before, you said also sort of falling in here is fragment sentences, and that surprised me a bit. Like a sentence without a noun. Are we going to allow this?
Well, you're seeing it now, even in fairly, I don't know if you'd see it in the New Yorker, but it is not unheard of, even in high-end journalism, for the sake of style, for someone to write a sentence that would be something like, Jennifer took her sister to the store, period, brother as well. Where that could be a comma, and should be a comma, or an em dash, but you are seeing more and more, I think for purposes of emphasis and for visual appeal, you're seeing what would normally come after an em dash or after a comma 100 years ago being put into a separate sentence that is not technically grammatical. I wouldn't do it in a white paper. I wouldn't do it in an article for Harvard Business Review. And there was a time when I would never have done it to save my life. But now I'm taking a more flexible approach, depending on the context and depending on the subject.
I think that's good, and it adds a bit of flair and individuality to your opinion piece or what have you. And I think it's easy to, when you boldly put that in, and then often someone will come in and sort of clear it out and remove that. And this is the failing of too many people editing a document, that you end up with the sort of lowest common denominator and everyone taking any kind of flavor out of it because somebody doesn't like this and somebody else puts in all the Oxford commas or what have you. And you just end up with something that it's fine and it's technically correct, but it's not spicy and interesting. So we do try, I think here, to try and have a more open mind and reduce the number of people reviewing this document to the bare minimum, because you end up with actually a better outcome.
And to be fair, in practice, many of our clients, we are helping them write in a lot of cases. We're working with them to draft an article. And a lot of our clients are not native English speakers. And as a result, their natural voice is relatively formal. Their natural writing voice is relatively formal. And I don't blame them for wanting to appear on paper or on the screen the way they would actually write. Nicole and I had the passive voice beaten out of us. People who learn English in China or India have been taught strictures that they've absorbed and they want to honor, and they don't feel comfortable just casting off all limitations on grammar. And I respect that. I understand it. I've lived in both worlds, and I don't blame someone for not living in the world I'm in right now.
That's fair. I mean, if you're trying to capture an individual's voice and the way that they write, your thing needs to reflect the way that the rest of their content has and will do in the future when you're not working with them. And so if suddenly they have this one, which is a completely different style, and they won't approve it, then you shouldn't do that. My point was more, given a lot of these things are a value judgment, if you have lots of people editing a document, you can end up with the thing that everyone agrees on, which is the blandest version of it, a non-controversial version. It could just get watered down. That's all.
No, that's right. I mean, I think every company we've ever worked with aspires to have a lively, conversational, friendly, warm voice. But all too often, the process of generating content it tends to iron out all of the character that makes someone's voice, that even a brand voice relies on. It's not even about individual voice. When you have the kind of process, Morgan, that you were describing there, it tends to iron out even the amount of character that the brand itself aspires to on an institutional level.
100%. Yeah, everybody wants to be fun and conversational, and then they edit it all out. So,
the next one here is comma splices. So what is a comma splice? It's joining two independent clauses. I went to the shop, comma, I bought some milk. Not two different sentences. Just using a comma like you don't care that these two things are. So like just wantonly linking two sentences with a comma. It's an outrage.
it is an outrage. That's what semicolons are for. That is why we invented the semicolon. It always looks a little strange. To me, it looks a little sloppy. It's got to be something really creative. It's got to be done in a really good way for me to be cool with it, or else I'm going to throw an and in there. I went to the store, comma, and I bought some milk. That's correct. Or put a semicolon there.
Right. But you're changing the pacing of it there, aren't you, though? If you sort of add that alighting and in there. I am a fan of the semicolon to link these two sentences together. I went to the store, semicolon, I bought some milk. Great. I think use of semicolon shows confidence, and I think that shows some flair, and it's swapping it with an and. Anyone can do that, but not everyone can use a semicolon in that sentence. But Chris, you think that semicolons, like PR people, the other place we see a lot of semicolons, of which I'm a bit of as I am a fan in this instance, they sort of just bomb them into mega lists, and
that's right.
Pour semicolons pressed into this humdrum usage.
I think that Americans, they learn the semicolon in high school and then forget about it as a tool for writing longer sentences. The primary use of the semicolon is one that very few Americans touch after high school. I think largely because with punctuation getting so free and easy, you don't really need the semicolon. You have alternatives now. You can start a sentence with and, you can use an em dash, you can mix it up with much more visually impressive punctuation. But yes, the one place that Americans and PR people in particular, they love to use a semicolon is in long lists where you use a semicolon to distinguish like sublists composed of multiple elements. And I nearly always find the use of a semicolon in lists like that more conspicuous and awkward than either finding another way to write it or just using commas. For whatever reason, I find it calls so much attention to the mechanics of the list that it creates the effect of laboriously unsplitting an infinitive or keeping a preposition where it strictly needs to be in the sentence rather than putting it at the end. I am often reading lists like this that are separated by semicolons and thinking, I wasn't confused. I didn't actually need this. I strongly suspect that most lists that we break up with semicolons could probably have been more profitably rewritten or just left strictly with commas, relying on the rhythm of the sentence and the sense of the components of a list to do the work of helping the reader understand what goes with what. Properly ordering the elements of a list can go a long way. We learn this as Americans, we learn this rule about semicolons, and we just love that rule. We're just waiting for a chance to break up a big list.
I'm a big fan of the semicolon in the earlier use. It just put it in there because it surprises people, right? And it's sort of a little bit more effortless than a great big bold em dash. I'm also a big fan of the full colon. I like that too. So I think that just, spice things up. Use a few different types of punctuation, folks.
I think you underestimate the native skill required to properly deploy a semicolon.
Oh, that's fair.
I do think that if you grow up as you did in a literate culture that makes frequent and good use of the semicolon. You're seeing it in the newspapers. It's rewarded when you use it in your writing, in your essays. I think you absorb the right practices. You sort of unconsciously come to understand when it is going to make a sentence feel effortless. I often, when I'm reading British authors and I'm reading their nonfiction, and I'm marveling at these paragraph long, perfectly poised, perfectly balanced sentences, the semicolon will often be a part of those sentences. But very few people who came up through the American system can deploy a semicolon that elegantly. So where you're encouraging it, I would say this is a black diamond punctuation mark.
I like that, the black diamond. I mean, it does take some confidence when Google Docs or Word is sort of Grammarly is sitting there going, no, this is wrong.
Yeah, just put a period there. Capitalize the next word.
Yeah, and you're like, okay. But, then there's a certain sense of satisfaction saying, no, Grammarly, no.
That's right.
You're wrong. And I'm boldly going to go with a semicolon here, and the rest of you be damned. And I'm going to wear my semicolon with pride. And I think that then the reader, as they read through it, they're like, gosh, this author, the suave, the vigor of this sentence. I think they love it.
Well, it's the confidence. See, the word confidence is the right one here. It's like wearing a bold check pattern or a burnt orange blazer. If you know how to pull it off, you're going to look amazing. And it takes confidence to do it. That is important. That awkward use of the semicolon, if you get right down to it, every time you notice that somebody's using a semicolon, they probably shouldn't have used a semicolon. If they're not concealing the art of it, if you're noticing that it's there, it looks like you're trying hard.
That's fair. Don't use more than one. Don't spam the poor semicolon in. That's a giveaway. So you gotta be subtle about it. Otherwise, it looks like, hey, I've just discovered this and I'm going to use it everywhere. And that ruins the effect. Before we wrap here, are there other grammar nits that you've seen lately that are getting under your skin?
Honestly, I could do an hour on the M-dash. So when I heard we were doing this episode, I thought, okay, we're going to have to keep the M-dash section within bounds. Don't know if I managed that, but yeah.
Well, that's great. So I think in summary here, I like the guidance that be confident about it. The rules are there for the sort of guidance of wise people and the obedience of fools. And so try and get your communication across, add a little bit of flair with it. But I think it doesn't all need to be the same monotone type. And we don't need to sort of slavishly follow the rules, because I do think then that adds some verve to your writing, and you want your reader to enjoy reading it, right? And I think using these can certainly do that. We didn't discuss the double space because that war has ended. If there's any remaining ones out there, those will soon be mopped up. But I feel like that was one that didn't make this cut. All right, folks, hope that was useful to you. We certainly enjoyed that one. Please join us again next week. Nicole, Chris, talk to you soon.